I grew up in a family where I felt pretty invisible, you know. My dad, let's call him Robert, was this really traditional, manly guy. My younger brother, Mark, was exactly what he wanted. Into sports, a bit rough and tumble, a real chip, off the old block. Me? Not so much. From a young age, I was drawn to things my dad thought were, well, not for boys. I loved being in the kitchen, reading anything I could get my hands on and even singing. I was definitely a mama's boy. Robert tried to get me into football, but I was hopeless, and honestly, my heart wasn't in it. We just drifted further and further apart because we had nothing in common that he valued. He always had great things to say about Mark, praising his every move, but I barely got a nod. My mum, bless her soul, was the opposite. She was fair and loving to both of us, and that's why I adored her. I did try to connect with my dad sometimes, to bridge that gap, but it felt like he wasn't interested in meeting me halfway. Then the worst happened. My mum got sick, cancer, and it was aggressive. Before we knew it, she was gone. I was only about 14, in middle school. It absolutely shattered me. I completely spiraled. The only place I felt any comfort, any connection, was in the kitchen. It was like an anchor in the storm. My mom was an incredible cook, and she used to tell me that if she hadn't had to take over her father's business, she probably would have become a chef herself. So for me, cooking wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was the only thing that made sense, the only way to feel close to her memory. My dad and brother, on the other hand, bottled everything up. They didn't show much emotion about Mom's passing, and instead of bringing us closer, this tragedy just seemed to push us further apart. My dad hated my focus on cooking. He'd constantly badger me to get out of the damn kitchen and do something more manly. It came to a head one day. He was furious, telling me if he saw me in the kitchen again, he'd make me do all the household chores. He yelled at me to be more like Mark, to man up, and I snapped. I yelled back that he never loved me, and he just agreed, said it was true. That was it. The raw truth was out there. I guess that was pretty much the last time we spoke to each other openly. After that, I stopped trying to win him over, and he clearly didn't care. For the next few years, I basically lived in my room when I wasn't at school, listening to music and poring over cookbooks, learning new recipes. I was more determined than ever to make this chef thing work, not just for me, but for Mom. My dad and I only spoke when absolutely necessary. Mark pretty much ignored me too, following Dad's lead. After Mom passed, I felt truly alone in that house. Fast forward to college applications. I applied to several top culinary schools, including one of the most prestigious ones in Europe, as well as some regular universities, just to have options. I'd actually interned at a local restaurant the summer before, in secret, and managed to get a recommendation letter which helped a ton. I got accepted into several places, including the one in Europe. I was over the moon, but also terrified, because now I had to ask Robert for money. I'd prepared myself to beg if I had to. There was no way I was giving up this dream. So I finally sat him down and told him. I was ready for him to say cooking wasn't a real job or wasn't masculine, but what he actually said was far worse. He flat out refused to pay for any of my tuition. I was so confused. It wasn't like we were struggling financially. My dad is pretty well off. He could easily afford to send me anywhere. But money wasn't the issue. He looked me in the eye and said that sending me to such a reputable school, especially far away, would make Mark feel insecure. Apparently, Mark was really struggling with his grades and couldn't focus, and Dad didn't want my success making him feel worse. He told me I should either go to community college or figure out how to pay for my education myself. His golden child's feelings were his priority, and he didn't want me competing with his son. I was absolutely stunned. I couldn't believe a father could be so cruel, so openly prioritize one child over another and crush the other's dreams like that. I tried to explain how much this meant to me, how hard I'd worked, but he wouldn't budge. He was completely fixated on Mark and his perceived insecurity. After a lot of pleading, crying, and finally a huge fight where I said some things I probably shouldn't have but felt every bit of, I walked out of his house for good. I moved in with my maternal aunt Carol, Mum's older sister. The only reason I hadn't considered it before was because I found some comfort in the house where I grew up with Mom, and I didn't want to change high schools, which I'd have had to do as Carol lived quite a distance away. I explained everything to her, how my dad had refused to pay for my education, how desperate I was. Asking her for help with such a massive expense felt awful. She wasn't wealthy like my dad, but she was incredible. She reassured me she'd find a way. She reached out to her friends, and together they somehow managed to raise enough money to send me to that culinary academy of my dreams. I will forever be grateful to them. Once I was there, I worked my tail off. I took a part-time job and dedicated myself completely to my studies and practice. I wanted to make sure every cent they'd spent on me was worth it. I worked tirelessly, constantly pushing myself. By the time I graduated, I was considered one of the most skilled students. Within a few months, I landed a job at a really high-end French restaurant. Every month, I sent half my earnings back to Carol to start paying back the generous loans. It was slow going but steady. I was just so thankful I didn't have crippling student loan debt. I worked in Europe for several years, gaining invaluable experience and saving up every penny I could. Finally, I had enough to come back home and open my own place. For a couple of years before the restaurant was ready, I worked as a head chef at another local spot, while simultaneously working on my own business plan. Everything finally fell into place a few weeks ago. I officially opened the doors to the restaurant I'd dreamed of for so long. 2 friends from my culinary school days in Europe joined me as co-owners, which was great. Since they were happy with the location, I got to choose the name. I named it after my mother. It felt so right, like she was a part of it. And it turned out to be a bit of a lucky coincidence. Her name is quite beautiful and not common at all in our city, Oakhaven. We had a small private party a few days before the official opening for some select guests. Of course, Carol and several of her friends who had chipped in were there. Some old school friends too. My dad and brother? No, I didn't invite them. We hadn't spoken since that day I left home, and neither of them had ever reached out. I honestly thought we were all better off, but I should have known better. Success has a way of making people crawl out of the woodwork, and that's exactly what happened. They showed up about an hour before the party was supposed to start. Security didn't stop them because they shared my last name and claimed they were here to surprise me. That much was true. I was absolutely floored to see them. My dad, Robert, and Mark greeted me like nothing had ever happened, acting incredibly warm and proud. Probably the first time in my life they'd genuinely acted that way towards me. I was so shocked I just froze. My partners noticed something was off, and after polite introductions gave us some space, for which I was so grateful. I was still reeling when they hit me with the next surprise. They had a gift, a beautiful portrait of my mother. Robert said he commissioned it as soon as he heard a fancy new restaurant with Mom's name was opening in Oakhaven. He just knew it had to be me, and that he'd always known I had it in me. Mark was just as bad, piling on the praise, saying how immensely proud he was. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt so fake, and I knew there had to be an angle. I didn't say much, just waited for them to get to the point. Eventually they did. Mark was apparently working as a bartender now, a job Dad had pulled, strings to get him at a friend's club. His grades had been terrible. No sports scholarship, nothing really panned out like Dad expected. Ironically, he was the one who ended up going to community college after getting rejected elsewhere. And what they wanted? They wanted me to make Mark a partner in the restaurant. Just hand him a significant stake, a respectable position, even though he'd done absolutely nothing to earn it. I wanted to laugh in their faces. The sheer nerve! But I somehow managed to keep a straight face and just told them I'd think about it. I had no intention of thinking about it, not for a second, but I didn't want them to leave. I wanted them to stay for the party because I had a much better plan in mind, a way to expose them, to get my own back for everything. They looked pleased, totally oblivious to what was coming. As the guests arrived and the party got going, I socialized while my dad and brother did the same. I even overheard them bragging about me to people, just marveling at their audacity. Towards the end of the evening, it was time for the hosts, my partners and me, to give a toast. My friends went first and I saved myself for last. This was my moment. I started by thanking everyone and raising a glass to my mother. I spoke about how she was my inspiration, the reason I ever believed I could do any of this. Her faith in me stayed with me long after she was gone. After honoring her, I moved on to the less pleasant truth. I spoke about having to take out a substantial loan from my Aunt Carol and her wonderful friends to go to culinary school, thanking them profusely. Then I explained why I had to borrow the money in the first place. I told everyone how I grew up with a father who never loved me, who put me down for my interests, and a brother who was his favorite. I explained how my dad refused to pay for my education out of fear that I would become more successful than his golden child, which led me to leave home. But, I said, despite all those obstacles, I persevered and built this. So, in a twisted way, I suppose they deserved some credit for the hardships that ultimately showed me how resilient I could be. You could have heard a pin drop. So many people were staring at my dad and brother with the nastiest looks. Even they looked genuinely uncomfortable, though I knew it didn't run deep. Then I walked over to them, and putting on the fakest smile, I hugged them, just like they had hugged me earlier. "Because you showed up tonight to celebrate my success," I announced to the crowd, "I'm forgiving you for everything that's happened." And then came the kicker, and I'm even ready to offer my brother Mark a job here as a bartender. To everyone else, it looked like this incredibly emotional reconciliation. People started clapping, some even wolf whistled. Only the three of us knew it was pure performance, a calculated public humiliation. And it worked. They had to stand there smiling and looking grateful because they couldn't exactly storm out in a rage, which is exactly what they wanted to do. Later, after most guests had left, they cornered me outside. They were absolutely livid, I swear. There were tears of pure anger in Mark's eyes. They demanded to know why I'd done that, why I hadn't just turned them away if I never planned to make Mark a partner. I just laughed. I told them this was my way of paying them back, my revenge for years of being treated like a second-class son, for crushing my dreams. I told them it was exactly what they deserved. Then I just walked away. I didn't look back, even when I heard Mark crying and calling me the cruelest brother in the world, or my dad yelling that I'd regret this. I just got in my car and drove off. That was a couple of days ago. I haven't heard from them since. Carol thinks I might have gone a bit too far, that I should have just kicked them out. But I don't agree. They deserved every second of it. No, despite what Carol said, I decided I wasn't going to reach out or apologize. I don't feel sorry and I won't pretend I do. They had their chance to apologize when they came to the restaurant, but they didn't. I explained this to Carol, and while she still thinks I was too harsh, she hasn't pushed it. We just have to agree to disagree on this one. Of course, Mark being Mark, he's now running around talking trash about me to all our old school friends. It's annoying that we went to the same high school because now random people are texting me, asking if it's true that I humiliated my dad and brother and kicked them out after feeding them 3-day-old food. Yes, he added that little detail, to make himself sound more like a victim. Normally I wouldn't care about petty rumors, but I don't need this affecting the restaurant, especially not potential customers. So, I texted Mark. I told him that if he doesn't stop spreading lies about me and the restaurant, I will make sure he loses his bartending job. I'm hoping that gets through to him because I really don't have the time or energy for their nonsense right now. I'm swamped with the restaurant. Get this, Mark actually texted back saying he'd only stop if I made him a partner. I mean, the level of delusion is astounding, right? Does he not realize talking smack about the place is the worst way to get a stake in it? I'm pretty sure this is Robert's idea, trying to strong-arm me into giving his darling son a fancy job he hasn't earned. But it's not going to work. I told him if he doesn't knock it off, he'll be hearing from my lawyers, and that he's in absolutely no position to negotiate with me. I haven't actually done anything legally yet because I hate drama, but I will absolutely follow through if he pushes me. This was my last warning. He'd better take it seriously. So, yeah, it's been about a month since that last text exchange. Things have been really busy with the restaurant, which is doing great, thank goodness. But the family drama wasn't over. Even though Mark stopped the public trash talking, they were clearly still desperate to muscle in on my success. So, Robert decided to try intimidation. He and Mark showed up at my house a couple of weeks ago, unannounced. They immediately started threatening me, saying they were going to sue me for using my mother's name for the restaurant. They even claimed they'd already spoken to a lawyer, and that if I didn't want trouble, I needed to make Mark a partner right away. I honestly just stared at them. I knew instantly they were bluffing. What lawyer would take such a ridiculous case? It was my mother's name. She was my parent too. As far as I'm concerned, no law could stop me from honoring her like this. I'd had enough of their nonsense. I told them if they didn't leave me alone right then, they'd be forcing my hand and I would call the cops. That's when Mark lost it. He snapped, just completely enraged, and tried to grab me by the collar. Luckily, Robert grabbed him and held him back. I think all the humiliation and frustration had finally gotten to him. It wasn't my fault, though, and they were lucky I didn't call the police right then. I told my dad he needed to get out of my house, but he told Mark to go cool off in the car and said he wanted to talk to me privately. Once Mark was gone, he tried a different tactic: manipulation. He looked at me with this fake sadness and said that if my mother knew what I was doing to them, she'd be incredibly upset, and that I should just bury the hatchet. That was the last straw for me, using my dead mother to try and guilt trip me. That was a new low even for him. I told him in no uncertain terms to get the hell out of my house. We were way past reconciliation. Neither of them had ever apologized, not once, for anything they'd done to me, and they expected me to just forgive and forget. As for what my mother would feel, I'm sure she would have been just as heartbroken and let down by his actions back, when he refused to pay for my tuition, and by every single time he made me feel worthless for not being the son he wanted. He was the absolute last person who should be lecturing me about what Mom would or wouldn't like. I know she's proud of me wherever she is, and nothing he says can change that. My restaurant is doing well, thankfully, and we're hoping to expand soon. That's where my focus is. I'm building my life, a life they tried to stop me from having, and I'm doing it in a way that honors the person who truly believed in me. They are just not a part of it anymore. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more deep and meaningful stories.